One of the first things I'll tell you is that we do have two family drivers, not from drinking or driving. We don't drink, we don't do drugs, my wife and I. We have nothing against it. We don't tell people what to do. But one of the things is that I just can't stand being like that. So I wore it around while I came to say hi to everybody. So at least you knew I had at least one suit. So. But my life starts like this. I mean, we were very poor. I'm not crying to everybody. Anybody here remember Converse shoes? Okay, Converse shoes came back out. They came out in the late 60s, first 70s. They were the first shoes. So my mom goes and buys me a pair of these things. Well, at the time, I didn't know there were Converse shoes, and then there's Converse shoes. So of course I got the Converse shoes. The Converse shoes up here are 19 bucks. You could buy these other ones down here 10 bucks. Within 2 weeks I'm wearing them. Sure enough, down the side of the shoes, they're tearing right there because they're the cheap ones. But you know, I kept wearing them because they were Converse, and my friends at school and kids, hey, look at your shoes. I kept wearing them because, you know what, by that time it was like 4th or 5th grade, I understood that's all my parents could afford. You know, I kept wearing them. I didn't go to mom and dad and say, hey, you know, I remember creditors calling our house saying, hey, listen, you need money and the whole thing. Your parents have you Mr. Schlater. Back in the days, I still remember to this day, they have Mr. Schlater, please. Well, I'm sorry, he won't be home till 3:50. I remember to this day, my dad said, anybody calls, just tell him I'll be home after 3:50. At that point, I realized he knew he was going to always have creditors calling him, and that was just part of what life was going to be. But it taught me so much about life then. At that time, I had no idea that's what it was teaching me, but it sure did teach me. So I did start. I do have 5 brothers and sisters. My dad never made 20 grand a year when we were kids. This is American. I don't care if it's American or not. 20 grand a year at that time. The only big blessing we had when it came anything to do with it, my grandparents bought my parents 3 houses as we got older and we had the kids. Typical, and one thing I'm going to tell you right now, I don't get into religion. I don't care what religion anybody is. There's all the religions in the world. Are you just down to earth to people? And I'm not preaching to anybody. That's my biggest thing. I'm Catholic. You know what? That's the family I came to. I have nothing against Catholic. I go to church probably 50 weeks out of 52 weeks a year. I go, I pay attention most of the time. Sometimes I just lose interest. I'm thinking about, I'm just being honest. Can I tell you how bad I am sometimes? I brought this here for a reason, not just to keep track. I do emails when I'm in mass sometimes, not very often, but it'll buzz or whatever. And my daughter sent me a picture of Jack, the grandchild, and you know, so I'll send it back. So, but you know what? As I grew, everything was cool. And then, you know what? I went right through and got a little bit older and everything. I love my brother and sister. My dad used to be a baseball coach for all his kids and everything as we got older and older and everything. And you know, finally, I delivered newspapers from the time I was about 9 years old, and then right up until I was 13. And then one day, the old Jewish guy who owned the IGA across the street, about 3 doors up from where we were, says, Mike, I want you to come over and see me. He called me one morning early. It was summertime. And he says, I need to see him. So I go over. And by the way, I'm Catholic, so you know I would never lie. Okay, well, maybe once. He says to me, he says, listen, anybody ever ask you ever again, you tell them you're one of my relatives. I looked at him and said, Neil, how come? He goes, I have a job for you. What's that? He goes, in the state of Ohio at this time, when you're 13 years old, you're allowed to work in my store if you're 13 or older. Back then, you had to be 16 years old. It was none of the 14-year-old or any of this. It's amazing. I suck at names. I'm going to be the first to tell you. I apologize if you told me your name. I'm just terrible at it. But you know something? I did, and he says, I can let you work here carrying groceries out to people's cars. He hires me in, minimum wage, $1.65. The guy's paying me $2 an hour cash. I'm making $2 an hour to this day. I can still tell you, in tips on top of it. So I just went from making $12 to $15 a week delivering newspapers to making $4 an hour cash. I'm rich. Remember, you're not 16, you don't have a car, right? So, you know, I used to take all my friends to this day, and at the time, I didn't realize this. And I'm not, one thing, please don't think I'm bragging, I'm just telling you the story of this. I used to take my friends, we'd go to Dairy Queen, we'd go to McDonald's, we went to Arby's, because at that time we had Arby's, and I would take them to the movies. At the time, it cost 50 cents to get to the movie, and it used to cost us 50 cents to buy popcorn in a pot. So I used to take them, all my friends, anybody want to go, because I had all this money from working. I knew they weren't making very much money. So I said, come on, let's go to the movie. Boom. Take my brother, sister, anybody wanted to go. So as time went on, I kept doing that. And then this Dr. Fossil said, you know, something really weird happened. We were at this thing in Columbus, Ohio, and there was a Domino's pizza. I was there at this test thing that we were running against, where it was a testing where we were running against other schools down at Columbus. That's where Ohio State is. And so we were there and we run a competition, and everybody was ordering Domino's in, because at that time there wasn't even 100 Domino's store. And all of a sudden, one day, 5 miles from where I live, there's a Domino's. By the way, you were incorrect. I wasn't walking. I was driving at 17 years old. Now remember, he's a doctor, so sometimes they get a little confused, so you just gotta remember, okay? So he's good at the kidney part. It's the part of his life. So anyhow, what I ended up doing, I applied. The guy says, I have no jobs available, but I'll call you if I do. 3 days later, the guy calls me, says, hey, it's 2:45 in the afternoon. I just walked in from school. He says, hey, man, you're not gonna believe it. I need you at 4 o'clock today. This driver broke down. He says he's never gonna have the money to fix his car. I said, I'll be there, don't worry about it. I've been in the pizza business ever since then. That was November 15th, 1977. I started as a driver in Domino's. So as things went on, everything went well. I became a trainee, driver. I was trainee, manager. We went to see Tom Monahan, the founder of Domino's. He told the coolest story. He came, he bought everybody breakfast at this thing. He had these cold little breakfast sandwich things, these nasty stale donuts. We were in a Howard Johnson, so it wasn't like we were here, right? We were, okay? And we're in this nasty place, and there was about 16 of us in there. He says, look, this is all you gotta do. You become a trainee, you gotta come to Ann Arbor and take these 4 ABCD classes, and you have to be a manager, and you can franchise. Now, if you stay and you're a supervisor, and you have to supervise for 18 months, you can get an area up to 10 stores. So what do? I go become a manager for a year. The guy I'm working goes from 0 stores to 7 stores. He asked me, will you stay and supervise? I stay and supervise for him for 18 months. Well, it's actually 20 months before I left. I quit working for him after Christmas in 1982. I go and open my first store in Winnipeg. I opened the first Domino's store ever outside the United States in Winnipeg. I opened it May 12th, 1983. So what happens? Domino's is now in 78 countries. They have 6,500 of the stores. And they are this year, they are going to open the 13,000 store worldwide. So, and it was all there. I don't want to get off the subject this, but I'm going to tell you the 2 smartest people in Domino's. This isn't bragging. Hold on 1 second. Nobody else is going to pat me on the back. You know who told me that? My 7th grade teacher. I'll never forget her. She's gone now. She had passed away from cancer when she was in her 70s. But she says, don't ever be afraid to pat yourself on the back, because she said people aren't always going to do it. And so I've never forgot to pat myself. But you know what? There's a guy in South Korea that owns the Domino's store. Remember the 78 countries? And there's this poor bald guy, not the best looking guy. I do have a wonderful wife. We'll get to her later. But do you know something? The guy in South Korea and I are the only 2 people that own our stores, that own the franchise. The rest of them are just stock. Don't get me wrong, they're fabulous, fabulous companies. But you know what we do? We stay involved in our communities much, much more. And we got all the money because we don't have to worry about the stock. That gives me all my money here to do what I want. I don't have to worry about, oh, you're a shareholder. I'm just pointing at you. Don't take this personal. But, oh, yeah, you're an accountant. I'm sorry. Wrong guy. Let's point at somebody different. Okay, I'll point at you, young lady. But you get where I'm coming from there. So that's what happens there. And, you know, you know what? I was married before. My first marriage, things didn't work out. I ended up with daughters. Had our first daughter in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I did open that first store in Winnipeg in 1983. It was a thrill. Now you guys are going, you went to Winnipeg? All right, can I show you how smart I am? Hang on a second. One thing I understood in this business is people order when it's cold and disgusting. Do you know what Winnipeg is by the time you hit the end of September until April? So what do you think? They order in pizza. I went there. By the time I opened, and when I left the United States, once again, I'm just giving you numbers, not bragging. When I left the U.S., I was making $35,000 a year at the end of 1982. When I got to Winnipeg, within 18 months, I had 3 stores open. I was making 30 grand by then. I was making 30 grand a month by then. And you know what? I wasn't even 24 years old yet. So, and but I ended up meeting this priest. I started going to church. I went to the old part of town because you know what? I wanted to make sure I didn't change at the time. And you know what? I just went to the old part of town. What's in the old church in Winnipeg? Do you think? What people are there? The immigrants. From where? The Philippines, because that's what lives in Winnipeg. So I'm sitting in the back of this church. Him and I hit it off very well because I helped him do a lot of the charity stuff. And a lot of it we were just helping the poor and stuff. And at the time it was nowhere near the money. I'm talking about I was giving him $1,000 here, I was giving him 100 pizzas here and doing that. But at that time it was a lot of money because I was still spending that money. You go, wait a minute, you said how much you were making? But remember, I was still building more stores at the time, so you had the cost to build them. So I went ahead and did it. And you know something? It worked so cool doing it with him because I learned the whole thing. One of the things I got to tell you, I'm in the back. At this time, I'm living with this girl from Ohio. She had moved to Winnipeg. We had been together since 1980. And in the Christmas of '84, we went home and got married. In '87, we had our first daughter. And then 4 years later, we had a second child. After we had her, she ended up wanting to move back to the U.S. So we ended up back in the U.S. And so things went well. And about the time that daughter hit, about 4 things just didn't work out. And that's just life. And won't get it. Neither one of us ever cheated on anybody, so I don't want you to think, oh, wow, it must have been. It was nothing like that. So anyhow, I took off. I moved back to Canada, and I lived in Mississauga. And Father Sammy, remember the priest, buddy? He's from the Bronx. Who was on a 2-year sabbatical in Toronto at the time? Father Sammy. So I called Sammy. I said, Sammy, I need a new wife. Because you know what, I'm just being honest, okay? They told me to be honest. So he says, well, what do you want? I said, well, you know who I love? He goes, listen, let me think about it a few days, I'll get back with you. He calls me back, and the magical date to this day of my life is February 16th, 1999. He goes, I have the most wonderful girl in the world. Schlater, 2 things. I want you to behave. Okay, and I said, Sammy, and by the way, I call him Sammy, but don't take it wrong. I said, Sammy, me not behave? And he says, I want you to behave, Schlater. I will. So he gives me her address. I go pick her up. So I go pick this girl up, and she's Filipino, and she is just gorgeous. I'm going, man, why would she go out with me? Okay, at the time, I'm still running about 35 pounds overweight. Worst time of my life, I weighed 289 back in the mid-90s. It was a couple years before I met her. I knew at that time I was probably going to get divorced. I started going to get myself in shape and everything. So anyhow, okay, all right. I was smart enough. Okay, I may not look that smart. So I go and I meet her. And do you know, within 60 days well, let me just tell you first quickly. After our 4th date, I call Father Sammy at home one night, about 12:30 at night, Winnipeg. I said, Sammy? He goes, yeah? Because he's asleep. Remember, he's about 15 years older than me. And he goes, yeah, who is it? I said, Schlater. Hey, man, everything okay? Right away, thinking accident, somebody's dying, whatever. I said, what's up? And he goes, hey, listen, I just want to tell you something. I said, you know that Lily Beck girl you fixed me up? He goes, yeah. I said, I'm going to go marry her. Whoa, wait a minute, Schlater, what are you talking about? I go, well, I went on my 3rd date now. Because you can't go marry her. I said, listen, I didn't say I was going to marry her today. I'm just telling you, I'm going to marry her. I said, listen, I've been on 3 dates. Everything's cool. I said, you wait and see. So anyhow, go out on that next date. Lily Beth says to me, says, hey, guess what? Monday's a holiday, but all the stores are open. Let's go shopping. I go, by the way, first thing I asked her, do not take this personal to anybody, but my first wife smoked. One of the first things I asked her on our first date, do you smoke? And she goes, no. And the first thing I did when I took her home that night was I hugged her, and she did not smell like cigarette smoke, so I knew she wasn't lying to me, because I'm not criticizing, I'm not saying nothing, but so anyhow, she sat there and she goes, can we go shopping? And I go, sure, what would you like? What do you need? And she just looked at me, she goes, you know how on our dates, you've asked me the same question on 3 things? I felt about that big then, because I felt pretty stupid asking, because it was part of my interview, just making sure that if somebody wanted me, I said, sure. She goes, can I be honest with you for a minute? And I go, God, man, what does she want? And I said, sure. She looked right at me, right in the face. She goes, can we just go buy you some new clothes? So, Now, I wore different clothes all 4 times. I made sure on the 4 dates I went, and she just says, you know what? She goes, you just need to update your, and then I thought about it, I go, God, when the hell's the last time I bought clothes? And I just felt that big, and I said, sure. Do you know something to this day? Who do you think's bought every piece of clothes, including what I'm wearing, my shoes, my socks, everything. She buys everything I wear to this day. So anyhow, life continues to move on. We are together less than 30 months, and where do you think we end up living? We had bought a house. We're living down in a little town called Campbellville, which isn't too far from Guelph. It's just the next exit up from Guelph. And we'd bought a beautiful home there, 2 acres, horse farm on the background and everything. And who calls me? Mr. Curran. You'll see him in a few minutes up here because he's going to let you ask some questions, and he's going to take shots at me on anything I missed here. And he's going to sit there and he's going to go, it's okay, fine, no problem. He calls me. He's running all of Domino's International. When he got there, they had 337 stores. They were in 6 countries. When he left, they were in 75 countries because that was 1989. By the way, he is from Montreal. Okay, no booing him, no shots at him. So anyhow, that's what ended up happening. He asked me, he said they need some help in the US. We moved to Indianapolis. Next thing you know, my 57 stores in Canada we had, all of a sudden we have 130 stores. We got stores from Pennsylvania to Alaska and Hawaii. We had 23 stores in Hawaii. At this point, I had already went to losing all my weight and everything. I didn't travel anymore. I just hired people and put I called them operating partners into all these different markets. That's the only state I've still never been to in my life is Hawaii. So what am I gonna do, sit out there in the sun with my bald head? I don't think so. So we moved down there, and so what do? And once again, I'm not bragging, but I just wanna make a point here. I built my dream house. I built a 9-bedroom, 15,000 square foot house on a lake. We have 675 feet. We live like on a small little island. It's just a 7-mile lake out there. It is my dream house. My kids love it and everything. By the way, by the time I get back home, within 2 years, my wife, I'm paying $120,000 a year tax-free. Plus I gave her the $600,000 house. Remember, this is the house we got in the 90s. Gave it to her all tax-free, and she gets this till the kids turn 21. She came to me and she says, look, I'll make you a deal. You give me the 120 grand, give me the house, all of it free. You can have the kids back. I ended up, you kidding me? You know what? She brought me a document to sign that day with the kids from her doctor. And Michael Kern will tell you, Fossil knows my daughters. I ended up with those kids. Those kids this year will be 28 and 24. At that time, they were, about 8 and 9 at the time, or 8 and 11 at the time. And I ended up back with the kids. So I adore my kids, and that's how it ended up going there. So anyhow, Domino's calls me. Mr. Curran, remember the guy who sent me to the US? Calls me. There's this public owned company that owns Domino's. Things aren't going good up here. They got 249 stores. 8 years ago, January, he calls me and asks, guess who asked me if I can do a deal to pick up all of Canada. And you can keep your US stores. That way you can stay living in your house that you built in the US. So I end up doing it. Next thing you know, next 2 years, Jonathan, our littlest guy, Lily Beth and I had one son together. He's now in kindergarten, so he goes to grade 1 and 2. I pick her up May 28th. I'll never forget this date. He gets out of grade 2. I look at her and said, what are we gonna do this summer? By this time, we've already bought this house. We live on the lake here in Canada. We have the house in the US. Got a beautiful house down in Leamington. That's how we lived in that town, because we found this house and we got 650 feet, all sand beach, waterfront, no neighbor on either side with access. So we got a lot of privacy there. And we live in a cul-de-sac, so nobody blowing by your house and blowing the horn and all that crap. So she looked at me and she goes, can we just move back to Canada? I remember this little Filipino had been here for 7.5 years before I ever met her. And I said, are you serious? And man, there was no like, I'm kidding. And she gave me that, well, look, you know how you women look at us men when you want something? August, school started that first Monday in September, August 26th, we were living in that house permanently forever. And we'd owned the house but just coming up on 2 years since we'd bought the house. So things go on, everything's cool. And now speaking of Jonathan, that's who's calling right now. If you want to know who the call is, that's our son who's in grade 9 now. And you know what? Everything's going really well and everything. My one daughter's living back in Canada already. She's the Winnipeg born. I have 4 kids, two that were born in Canada, 2. And I know you're going to say, well, wait a minute, you told 3 kids. The only unfortunate part of my life ever is I did have a daughter that was born with my first wife, and we never got her out of the hospital. She was born with a rare muscular disease. 1 in every 2.5 million children are born with this. And she was born, they put her on oxygen right away. And by the time she was about 20 days old, they came back with all the medical stuff, and they just said she'd never be able to walk and crawl. And I saw her do a code blue, and I never knew what code blue meant. I did not know that their face actually went blue. And I just bawled my eyes out. Those nurses were standing there, and I called my family in, and I just said, look, they're going to do some testing on her tonight. Without the oxygen, she may pass away. But they told me she probably wouldn't live an hour, and 43 minutes later, she was gone. It was the toughest decision, but to this day, I never felt guilty doing it. As soon as that doctor told me that night that she'd never be able to walk and crawl, by the way, that night, that was after she had gone code blue. That doctor, I was there all that night. He came and told me that at 3 o'clock in the morning because I was just sitting there still crying. I wasn't bawling my eyes out that time, but I'd been crying off and on, and I was just rocking her. And this doctor came in. It was only 2nd year as a doctor, and we were in Children's Hospital in Dayton, Ohio, and he told me that. And you know something? At that time, I could solve problems. That's why a lot of the Domino's I bought, problem stores here in Canada and stuff. But you know, you learn in life, and you know, I'm not making excuses why I let her go. But as soon as he told me that night that they were going to tell me the following week, they just had to get everything. Same thing. You people that are doctors here know all the rules, checking off and all. Dr. Stevens, you know when you made that comment earlier today about, you know, how we got to get all this stuff checked off and everything before we can do the documents on that one thing that we're working on. It's the same thing. That's why they hadn't had me sign it yet. So, but you know. So anyhow, our marriage ended up ending right after that, and but that wasn't because of the baby. You know, I'm just going to be real honest with you a second. She was going to get to serve with divorce papers the day before she told me she was pregnant. She had her tubes tied 5.5 years before that. And it just shows you. And I thought, well, maybe this is God telling me I need to hang in there. So that's what I did. That's life. So after I get divorced, by the way, can I tell you the beautiful part of Ohio? I'm not trashing Canada because we're going to get to the cool part about Canada. Do you know what the cool part about Ohio? 45 days to get divorced in Ohio, and that's it. I'm telling you, there's none of this 1-year nonsense. So meanwhile, you're living with your girlfriend and you're living with your boyfriend. The 2 of you are getting divorced. You have to explain it to me, and then the lawyers just keep jacking up the bills. Nothing against you lawyers. So I move here, and Father Sammy, I call him, and he just tells me, so Schlater, he goes, look, I got the nicest girl in the world. He goes, you gotta behave. And so we go out, and I'm telling you, after that first, second, third date, I was gonna marry her. So I got her to quit working after 2 months, and she just started traveling with me. And the biggest thing, she was worried about the money she sent home every month. I said, don't ever worry about it. And so we called Father Sammy, and I told her, if we ever divorce, I said, I will always, always give you money if we don't get married and we break up. I said, I'll give you, she's making $1,800 a month. I said, I'll give you $3,000 a month for 2 years. That will give you a job. If we ever get divorced, I said, I'll always give you $15,000 a month. Plus, I'll give you another $10,000 a month for every child we ever have for the rest of your life. And so that way, I didn't want her to ever worry about money. She goes, yeah, but how do I know you're going to do it? So what do you think? How smart am I? We call Father Sammy. Get Sammy on the speakerphone. We're sitting there, and she's crying. She goes, well, Father Sammy, you know what? But how do I? Well, oh, don't worry. He'll do it. But how do I know? Lily Beth, pardon my language, I'll kick his goddamn ass if he doesn't do it. I'll just tell you this right now. We've been together now over 16 years now. And so she's my sweetheart in life. All right, anybody here with their spouse right now? I'm just gonna change something real quick. Nobody here with spouse? Yeah, your spouse. Can I make him feel bad real quick? Excuse me, your husband's up here raising his hand. I just wanna up this a little, something cool. To the day, pouring down rain, snowing, 30-mile-an-hour wind or if it's 98 degrees, Dr. Fossil can tell you this, Mr. Curran can tell you this, anybody that's ever been to my house, that when we go out for lunch or whatever, Lily Beth's with us, I still open her car door everywhere we go to this day, everywhere we go. She is my little sweetheart, and it's great because whenever she yells at me in Filipino, and I won't tell you what I think she's asking me for, but I mean, okay, I don't know you well enough, so you know what? I end up coming back. We end up buying the country. At the time, we got 249 stores. Sometime later this summer, early fall, we will hit our 400th store. We're at like 391 right now. And the average store when we bought it was doing a little over 10,000. This year we'll be right at $1 million a store. So we've basically just right at about doubled. And you know, the thing that happened is that we're so happy we moved into the small town because we lived in all these big towns and everything, and it just brought us more down to the small earth. And one of the things we did when we did meet Fossil, we met him through another doctor friend who's the same doctor he is, only he takes care of down in Windsor. And you know what it is what we do is the charity stuff that we do together. And it took me a while to get Lily Beth used to it because she always worried about money because, you know, you come from a very poor environment and everything. But what we do is we do a lot of the different charities. I'm not here saying, hey, can you do something for Children's Hospital? Hey, can you do something for Heart and Stroke? I don't really care what charity anybody does, but you know what, just don't forget to do the charities. The biggest thing is people sit there and they save money and all of a sudden, you know, and this is what I've had happen to me so many times. I meet so many of these people that are in their 70s and all of a sudden he goes, yeah, I got $9 million. And I understand, I'm not saying everybody's gonna have $9 million, but all of a sudden they realize, I don't know why I just didn't donate some of this over the years because, you know, I could have helped this charity or done this charity. And I always tell them, don't give all your money away. You got to make sure you save money and everything. And then you got the ones that can sit there and they afford to give $50 a month. Then do the $50. I'm not one standing here saying, oh, you should give $1 million and yeah, blah, blah. It's not that at all. Because believe me, I started, and that was my whole thing. With Father, I did what I could do when I was doing the thing, but the biggest thing I did with him was, and it wasn't because I was Catholic and because he's the priest, because he was taking care of the poor. And at the time, remember, at that time, I was so poor still as a kid, that's what I understood. Then, after losing that child, I became very, very, very big into the children's world. But there's all this other stuff we do. You know, one of the other charities that we have, and I apologize, I won't embarrass you if I ask you the name of that company. I apologize because there's so many charities we do. I want to tell you this. How many people in London, before I was coming here, have any clue of anything that we do here in London? Anybody really have any idea what we do here in London? Nobody really? You would be shocked if you knew how many millions of dollars we do right here in London every year. True or false, Dr. Foss? Every year right here. And I'm talking about poverty stuff also. You wouldn't even begin to believe, but you know what? Well, you're Domino's. How come you don't put your name on? Because you know what? At this point, we're not here for the advertisement part of it. And I'm sorry, can I ask you the name of it again? Marymount Children's Center. Do you know that we were introduced to this, and it was, you know, it was through a mutual person that she knows. I don't know why she likes it. It's her husband. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that's so imperfect. But you know something? We see these children that get sent there, and their families are broke up and fighting. And so they get there, and they may be there a day or two. They may be there a week or whatever. So we set up pizza day there, and so they get pizza sent there. Is it every Wednesday, I believe? And it's funny how I can remember the day that it goes there. But we set this thing up last year. And so they get pizza every Wednesday to feed all the kids there. Because in my mind, it's something that just helps those children there. And you know, something that makes them feel more at home. And they get to pick before they go to school what kind of pizza they like. So they give like a choice of 3 or 4 or 5 different pizzas, so they get to pick. And then and we feed all the people that work there and everything, and we charge them nothing. I'm not trying to brag and say, oh, hey, look how, it's got nothing to do with it. It's just one of those other things, and we do so many of those places across Canada right now. We're feeding 15,000 people in the next 8 days down where we deliver. They're all going to the Point Pelee Park. and they're all going in there. We're paying for the bus for them to go. We paid everybody's way in to go there, and all the schools are going in there. We got 7,500 going there, and we got 7,500 down in Kingsville at another park thing that they've got going down there. And you know what? But once again, there's a lot of people that are poor in that school and the whole thing. So, you know. All right, I want to tell one last story. Then I'll have Michael up here, and I'm just going to tell you this: how lucky our son is. And by the way, there is nobody. I should have asked this right. There's nobody from the press in here, right? I should have asked this question. Bad timing, Michael. Sorry about it. I just don't want anybody telling anybody any of this. I do not want this stuff in the press. I don't want to, but I am going to tell you something. I'm going to let everybody figure it out. I'm going to deny knowing anything about this. If you look up the Windsor Star newspaper, third week in June last year, somebody at our son's school, it's anonymous, but somebody in our son's school, he was in grade 8, set up for those kids all to go to university or college. They can pick anywhere they want to go. And you know, something really cool is that all of them were given scholarships, $10,000 per year, all of them. And the reason being that the kids in his class, there's 39 of them that they're paying for. So it's about $1.6 million. But the person, whoever it was that decided to do this, over 60% of the families make less than 60 grand a year. Now that's probably half of them are divorced families, so there's only one parent that takes care of it or whatever. And you know, our son's in that class, and he graduated from, so our son gets to go there free. So, but you know, I know I said one last thing, but there is one thing I do want to tell you about myself and how cool of what you do have. I had one other bad thing that happened to me, and I know I'm not good looking, and I do have a fabulous wife, and I apologize she's not here today, and she's not dying or nothing like that. She had this thing she had to go to today, and Fazal and I are just, we won't get into it, but whatever. It's nothing medical to worry about. But I do want to tell you one last thing. 7 years ago, I had a seizure, and I had never had one before, and that's very, very, very unusual to have a seizure then. So I'm driving home, I get my license back, wait about a year and a half, and I get my license back, and we're coming home from a meeting in Ohio one day, and boy, I feel like, you know, I'm on the pills, and I've been taking all my pills, and I'm feeling really bad and everything, and luckily I had a friend with me. And we're coming up through Ohio. We'd been in a meeting down in Cincinnati. So we drive up through, and so he tells me, he says, hey man, you better speed up. I'm in the speed lane. I'm doing about 35 miles an hour. Next thing you know, I'm doing 110 miles over. My buddy looks at me, he goes, man, are you stupid? He just sees my eyes just like this. So he pulls over. So we stop and get something to eat. He goes, hey dude, I'm driving. So we drive. We get to Windsor. We get about 20 miles across the border, halfway to my house, and man, I had a massive one. Toes straight out, fingers straight out. He takes me back to one of the hospitals. He's not from around here, he's from Calgary, and he calls them and says, hey, listen, I don't know where you are, so they give him direction back. So what do? I'd never been to a hospital anywhere in Canada. I make all this sarcasm. That guy gets me in to see a specialist for the epilepsy stuff and for having the seizure stuff that afternoon. I go there, I couldn't believe, man, this doctor, this isn't like what I hear about Canada and stuff. Because what do you really hear? You hear the people that had appointments that don't show up, and what do? They call on a Saturday night and want to know why they can't get an appointment on Monday, and you know, that's what half the song says. But you know something? I ended up checking in right here at the University Hospital a few days later, and I went for testing, and Dr. Stevens is the one who did really a lot of the testing for me with his associate, and Dr. McLaughlin. And I ended up qualifying, and March 20th, 3 years ago, I had brain surgery. And I wasn't dying, but the problem was at that point, I had put on almost 40 pounds in 37 days after having that seizure. And when was that seizure? I had over 80 people on July 1st at our house for a July 1st party. And what day do I decide to have it on? July 1st. Luckily, we got an ambulance there, and I just felt it was coming. I just sweating like a dog and everything. And we went off our street, not even 7 houses around the corner off the cul-de-sac. And next thing I knew, I woke up. It was an hour before I really came back through and everything. So Dr. Fazal Rahman was real helpful. He just, don't worry about it. He goes and tells my wife, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. They're going to need to keep him for 3 days. So he goes back to the barbecue and everything. And don't worry about that, man. He says, everything will be okay. And so they said, he'll get back with you later. So what do? They bring my wife by to see me that night at 10 o'clock after everybody goes home. And that was the end of it. But you know something? We are doing massive money with Dr. Stevens and them. And a lot of it's testing and the stuff that he does. And you know what? I just sincerely, I have 2 things. I really appreciate you coming today because I know your schedule at the zoo, and I appreciate you coming also, Dr. Fazal. But you know something, I can't ever thank you for the surgery because I mean it's made all the difference in my life, and you know, I just can't thank both of you ever enough again. And that's all I have to say. And I'll have Michael come if you can just give us 2 minutes. I want to see if there's anything else big I'm missing that he wants me to say. And